Hey guys, Scott and Phil from the Wealthlab Podcast. And most Aussies have got their retirement savings in a super fund, and most people have got their retirement savings with an industry fund. Today, we're going to go through a little bit of the history and the origin story of industry funds, their ties to the unions, what's been happening since APRA's performance crackdown that happened in 2021. And if you are listening to this podcast, you're not a client of ours, you've probably got a Host Plus Australian Super Rest CBAS account. If we just threw a dart on a random chalkboard, it's likely that's the fund you've got. So I'm going to kick off, and then we're going to go through a little bit of information. I've done some research here, and it's kind of an interesting thing. So in the 1980s, there was a big labour movement push. Mandatory superannuation was put in place in 1992, but the concept of superannuation had been around before that. In the 1986 national wage case, unions secured employers paid 3% of all the money they earned towards a superannuation-like product. So mandatory super came in 92, but back in the mid-80s, that was the initial wheels turning for a product that's going to start building retirement savings. And 3% back then probably wouldn't have been a lot.
Yeah, well, that's right. I can only imagine. I remember the big uproar when there was a proposal to start lifting it from, what was it, 9.5? I can't even remember now. It's been that long, but second that long actually coming into
It does depend who's in government a little bit, but it was the ACTU, so the Australian Construction Treasury Union at the time. And the idea was to give workers dignity in retirement. There's an interesting phrase that they've gone with the word dignity. I think, we've certainly seen that silent generation of that, let's say, pre-World War II, people going into their retirement minimum pension, and then it was probably not a super dignified end of life if you've literally got nothing to live on.
Yeah, I was thinking 3% is not going to buy you a lot of dignity either.
No, especially coming a little bit late.
Yeah.
And the industry funds were originally set up by the unions to serve workers in specific sectors. So, for example, we see a lot of people in the mining and forestry industry in CBAS. We see a lot of people in the healthcare industries in HESTA. And then we see Aware Super still targeting a lot of, say, nurses, as well as the people in the caring and education sectors. And that was where it really came from. Those funds were targeted specifically those sectors. Now, the investments themselves were relevant, which was kind of a weird thing. It wasn't really really an option. It was just this was the fund you were given. Phil, did you ever come across any of those weird corporate schemes that were set up by different businesses that were trying to do something, but they weren't a union when you were first starting out?
Yeah, I think there was a few. I used to work with a couple of blokes at one of the large unnamed banks that had, they tried running a bit of a corporate supermodel for a while, and they'd have a few blokes go out and try and round up the whole workplace and that whole sort of thing. Don't ever remember it being super successful.
No, well, they were never a good idea. And look, we're huge believers in superannuation. It's a great concept. Super wasn't always a given. It was fought for by the unions, and they said, well, all right, let's not just fight for wages. Let's fight for the retirement security of our members as well. And I think that's a great concept. It's one of the best things that we've got in our country, which is a super strong retirement scheme. And we look at places like, say, for example, the US, which has, I think, more than 10 times the population of Aussie, as well as a huge concentration of wealth. And their 401k system is, I think, now less than the entire superannuation system that we have here in Aussie.
It's amazing, isn't it? Yeah. It's crazy.
Phil, and over to you around the union legacy.
Yeah, so look, these industry funds, they have boards. So, they're a board there to manage and, steer the fund and the decisions and all that sort of thing. And they've been made up, historically been made up of equal representatives from the employer or the employer groups that particular fund might represent, and union representatives. So that was, I guess it's kind of an interesting thing. Yeah, I don't know. I actually don't know why they were structured like that in the first place, other than the union started the fund and obviously wanted to have some representation on the board. And I
think it's a point of control, and the biggest issue that we've seen is the lack of performance that has created. As there's been a huge amount of jobs for mates. As well as a bit of malaise. Like, why is it that some union representative here is now having influence over how a fund invests their money? And I don't want to colour this by saying, look, we are a competitor to an industry fund, because we do compete, but we do also recommend industry fund products from time to time too. So we can look at them both, but I think the time of the big super fund is past us, and it probably hit its peak in 2020, which was before the performance testing was put in place. The concept of bigger is always better was what they've been always running. But as we've looked at with the SoftBank fund, which is the biggest investment fund on the planet, the larger funds don't actually outperform the mid to smaller funds. And the rationale was bigger fund, more economies of scale, which is where they've got to today. And in reality, it's actually bigger fund, more staff offshore, more complexity, a bigger ship that's more difficult to turn, more historic problems.
And it sounds dumb, but actually just having too much money flowing into the fund is a massive problem for these big funds, because they have so many members, and the SG or the superannuation guarantee gets paid every month or every quarter. They have these massive inflows. Physically finding enough places to deploy that money to invest is actually a massive problem that these funds have. And that can slow things down too. They've got to go and find these, they can't necessarily just access stuff that's on market or quick. They've got to go and do all these deals with different asset owners and all that sort of gear just to physically find places to place money, which, it's an interesting problem to have.
So the concept of the APRA performance testing was launched in 2021 for what's called the My Super product, which is if you haven't made any selection for your super fund, you are probably in the My Super option.
Okay.
And there was a benchmark with a pass and fail, and there was an index put in place, and 13 funds failed, and they failed pretty badly. There's also quite a lot of industry funds that were very close to failing, but they just were tippy-toeing over the line, and it was actually because 2021 was quite a weird year in markets. 2020 was a huge downturn. 2021 was a huge upturn. So had there not been such a weird COVID movement, you would have had a higher number of funds failing as well, in our view, certainly in my view. And what that created a consolidation of funds. So the ones that failed themselves were either gobbled up by the bigger funds or they were disbanded. So some people were going, I've been sold. I don't really know what happens now. And we've certainly had that.
Actually, a really common inquiry we get. I was with this super fund, down with this one. I got no idea why or what the hell's going on.
Correct. So there was visible performance numbers for the first time ever in industry funds, and it really sort of, it's like the tide goes out. And they go, oh, okay, well, whoa. And that's something that we've been looking at for a really long time. And it's one of those things that was started with really pure intentions, which is dignity in retirement, putting aside funds in a mandatory pot to provide a long-term benefit in a superior tax environment, e.g. it's at a lower tax. But then it balloons into a bit of a Frankenstein in which there is some very large, powerful players controlling most of the money, and then the individuals going, well, first of all, these funds don't care about me. They don't know who I am, and I don't even know what brand I'm with at the moment.
Yeah.
So, Phil, the merger wave, we had, well, I don't know, maybe 10 or 11 different major funds come together. Tell me about the two biggest funds in the market right now.
Well, I'd say probably Australian Super and Australian Retirement Trust would be the two biggest out there at the moment. Australian Retirement Trust, for anyone that doesn't know, was born out of the merger of Sun Super and Q Super. Q Super being the Queensland Government fund, and Sun Super being a large sort of industry fund up here. They'd probably be the biggest two at the moment. Probably just depends on the day as to who gets the nod. And look, that's been an interesting one too, just watching all that play out and how watching these big organisations come together and how they meld their investment strategy, who does what, what assets come over and how they value everything's actually been a fascinating thing to watch unfold if you're a bit of a nerd. You should also. It's been also the industry super fund lobbying group has been incredibly powerful in that consolidation of groups. So if you Google ISA or Industry Super Australia, it's another lobbying group that does lobbying on behalf of these funds, and they are an interesting case study in consolidation of assets. The things that are of interest that I'd say is like if we were on the side of the large funds, is they've got enough capital to go and put money into ports, toll roads, airports, for example, Brisbane Airport, Melbourne Airport, etc. The flip side of that is that's basically all they've got, because they have so much money sloshing around. They have to actually do these mega projects that require a huge amount of due diligence, which I find really interesting, because we talk to the different managers that come out of those funds, and you talk to me like, hey, where are you actually invested? And this is us talking to the managers working inside the funds.
and quite often they'll have no idea.
Well, that's just teams of people all over the joint, don't they? Yeah, it's interesting. So I guess let's talk a bit about the difference between retail and industry funds. They're the two terms you see banging around. Everyone would have seen the old compare the pair ads on the telly and the whole.
Yeah, we don't see those anymore, do we?
No.
It's been really cut back.
It has. But I guess, like, what are some of the major differences, or what makes the difference between a retail and an industry fund?
Well, my view is, this is in my view, right? So, in my view, it gives you flexibility. So, the way that I talk about it all the time with people is that, so an industry fund, in my view, is basically a big bucket, and you've got a name, and you've got a line on an Excel spreadsheet somewhere inside the industry fund, and you've got a claim to some of that money in the industry fund. This is a bucket that's sloshing around. At any point in time, there is like literally tens of millions of dollars coming into it and coming out of it. There's also a lot of tax consequences that slosh around a lot as well. And it's actually quite ineffective. There's sort of nuances around how franking credits are passed on, which are not well, as well as also other types of taxes that the fund's sort of tax breaks that the fund members misses out because it's one giant bucket that's sloshing around. There's also further issues around if, for example, 15% of the members panic and move all their money to cash overnight, the entire fund gets affected because the fund itself has to sell down assets, which are usually selling in compressed markets. So if you have a million members in a fund and 150 of them, all of 150,000, all of a sudden click cash, the fund has no choice but to take the other 750,000 and then move that money down, selling at depressed prices, which as a net benefit, which is a net, causes performance drags straight away. I mean, in already a down market. The flip side of that is we like to use retail funds in that there's not a big bucket. Maybe it's one bucket, but it's your bucket and it's your name on it. So you have total ownership of it. The benefits of this type of retail fund is that you can see all the fees, you can see all the charges. You actually own the assets yourself via a direct ownership model inside your super fund. It's not a self-managed super fund. It's a retail fund. One of the things with these things is that you can really see all the fees. I'm talking all the ongoing transaction costs, all the taxes that are taken out. Industry funds, it's a little opaque. You've got no idea what the transaction fees are for assets because you just get a daily member price of whatever this current bucket is valued at by some random actuary. And then that's how your performance is moved, rather than a retail fund where you actually can see the underlying assets and you just sum them up. And that's what that's what your account looks like. So it's very, very different ways on holding assets. Phil, what's your explanation on that?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head as far as the assets and all that sort of gear. I suppose the other part of it that's worthy of consideration, one of the things you used to see in a lot of the advertising material was the old profit for members. All that profit from an industry fund flow back to member services, whereas a retail fund's an evil entity that's trying to make a profit off your super or whatever. I've got a few thoughts on that.
I've got thoughts too. Go and look at the number of fines that those funds are being paid. Those funds also take fines from members as well, and they are getting fined left, right, and centre. So
I was going. We were just talking about this yesterday. So I got an email as a member. I actually, I have an allocation to an industry fund as part of my super. There's various reasons why I've got that there. And got an email yesterday telling me about a class action that's being run against that fund and a settlement of however many millions of dollars that they're negotiating currently.
The legal fees involved as well.
Who's paying that? If there's nobody making any profit and it's all members' money within the fund, does that now mean that I'm paying my own compensation as well as all the other members that weren't affected that are now current members of the fund? Are they also paying my compensation? That's an issue.
Phil, they are.
Yeah. But the other thing I also think is, who gives a shit whether someone's making a profit or not making a profit? If all I care about is what fee am I paying and what return am I getting for that fee, I don't give a shit what happens after that. Am I getting a reasonable level of service? Can I see my super on and out? Am I getting a good return? Am I paying a fair fee? That's it.
I say,
I'll also say, throughout there, having worked at a few of these places over the years, some of the money that gets spent on sporting sponsorships for, people that may or may not be certain fans of certain teams that want to sit in the chairman's lounge every week, your money hard at work.
Yeah, we've seen those. Yeah.
The argument's been advertising is good for all members. Well, sure, you can advertise without having all your big knobs sitting in the chairman's lounge to bloody MCG every weekend. It's just.
Yeah, I think the summary is it's better that your super is in your own name. There's also a reason why, unfortunately, there's no not-for-profit banks that are in the top. I don't know. Is there any not-for-profit banks that are in the top 30?
No,
of banks that are doing
not at all.
well.
I don't think
Yeah,
so.
it's the CBA, the ANZ, Westpac, Macquarie are really where you want your cash sitting, because they're going to give you the best service. It's exactly the same for your super. Engaging with an advisor who can assist you with that process really, really will produce a superior outcome, in my view, because we can customize the portfolios, we can identify retail funds, and because not only because like there's also some retail funds that are not very good. There's a range.
Yeah, 100%.
And there's also so for example, here we are. What are the problems with retail funds? Well, some of them have failed the APRA test as well. Their performance has not been good. Some of them have locked up as well, so it's difficult to get funds out. In the same way that you've got industry funds with difficulty to get locked out. So it's not just a simple switch and movement process. And look, I was having this conversation with my brother, who's sort of wanting what he goes, what do you reckon I should do with my super? Normal question. That's why literally people come to us, and we took him through the process around it. I still, at my absolute core, think a retail fund is going to be the best thing for a scenario in which you've got, say, for example, a 40-year-old with 2 kids who's earning the family income, say, 150,000 between them both, and they're both contributing super. The performance difference plus the fee drag or the fee pickup that we can get with a retail fund at every point in time is going to create a superior return and create better dignity in retirement. There's insurance requirements, so there's insurance benefits you can have. If you can't get new insurance, there's default insurance that you can get. For example, Sun Super, Aussie Super have some default insurance options that we have used before for people that are unable to get insurance anywhere else.
Yeah. Yep. Oh, there's some good stuff out there. I just think too, and the government has played a big part in this too, the whole retirement review and trying to improve retirement outcomes. And, all good intentions may be ill-conceived or poorly put together. But when you look at these big box fund options, it's a default option. It's particularly the life stage funds that a lot of people are probably in there or have transitioned into. You'll see them called life stage or life cycle funds. Happy to go on the record right now and say I absolutely bloody hate the things. I reckon they're the most idiotic evolution in superannuation since superannuation was bloody invented. But look, they're okay if you are a person that does not care, that never looks at your super and is happy just getting the thing that's good enough, or it's okay, it's going to do okay. But the whole concept of becoming arbitrarily more conservatively invested as you get older is just the dumbest concept I've heard of in my life.
For the everyday, what that means is that your performance gets muted the older you get.
Yeah, just giving up more return. And it makes absolutely no sense. So you will always get a better outcome with a portfolio that has been designed for you based on what you want to do with your life at what times.
So Phil, when should I consider switching? What life stages should I have?
I'm a big advocate of having control over your super and your investments. I love it, and that's my thing. And obviously, I've dedicated my career to it. So I would say the earlier you start and the earlier you take control, the better. As soon as you probably want to have enough of a balance to make it worthwhile. But realistically, the earlier you take control and focus over what you're doing and design your superannuation to suit your life and what you want, rather than just having this one-size-fits-all stupid bloody thing that's going to get more conservative as you get older, I think the better off you're going to be.
So I would say the common ones are you've changed jobs, you might have had a new partner come in, you might have had a split, you might have, your kids might be moving on out of the house, and now you're sort of in the 50s, and you and your partner might be looking at each other going, oh God, we're 15 years from retirement. We sort of better make sure that we are doing something with our super fund. And I think it's just like I think of your super like a car. Like it needs to get you to retirement. You need to stay at the speed limit. You can't be going too slow. You also shouldn't be going too fast as well. You need to be at the limit. You need to be making sure you're at the limit, not just driving around without having any idea. You want one that's safe. You want one that's reliable. You want one that's suited to your journey, and then you don't want to overpay for it as well.
Yeah, good summary, I reckon.
Great. Guys, thanks so much for listening. If you've got any questions, if you've got friends and family that you think would benefit from a conversation with us, please forward this to them. We also appreciate those who do subscribe to the channel and like this videos. We really appreciate that as it goes to a wider audience. Phil, anything else we want to wrap up from there?
No, I think I've already had my spray today.
Thanks, guys. See you next time.
Thanks, Dave. Cheers. Thanks.